Hey everybody, Jason Sheftel here. It's been a while, but now we're going to talk about the Olympics, which are in full swing in China, and there's a lot of stories to talk about. The big one we're going to focus on is really just propaganda because it has been so overwhelming during the last few weeks. I mean, what China is doing with its Olympic propaganda, this is one of the most massive propaganda blitzes ever. The sheer number of fake accounts and bots and influencers, censors, staged photographs, distorted statements, just the wide scale manipulation of public opinion and all these crazy official statements. The sheer number of all of this pouring into the Olympics is really staggering. It actually does make, I mean, a lot of Soviet propaganda and other things look tame when you just consider how much the world has changed and how the appearance and ubiquity of social media has created many new avenues for official propaganda. And when social media was first coming into the public arena back in 2010, 2011, 2012, there was a whole Arab Spring where a lot of people who were idealistic and liberal in sort of what happens when information is allowed to flow believed that basically that there would be a massive democratic uprising in this sort of region, and it turned out to be something very different. And what we've found also, 10 years since, is that social media creates a lot of ways for governments that have the digital chops to really manipulate opinion. It lets them do it in just really insane ways. So that's what's going on a lot in China. It's a huge thing. There's this massive, massive effort I'll probably go into in another video. But what we'll talk about today are the human faces to this. And in particular, Eileen Goo. Eileen Goo is an 18-year-old American, actually, who's competing for China. And she's kind of become the centerpiece of Chinese propaganda around the Olympics, right? Because even if you're doing all this stuff, you really need a human face. And the comparison is obviously, not really obviously, but a good comparison to this would be Michael Phelps in the 2008 Olympics, where in 2008, China won more medals than the United States did. And that was a very big thing for China. It had put a lot of money into trying to create world class athletes and world class teams across all of these sports. And that was a great accomplishment, really. But the big story in a lot of ways was one guy, one American, who pulled in like 8 gold medals, which was just a staggering feat. And I think it was the biggest Olympic haul that any human had like since ancient Greece or something. It was a really crazy thing. So, but that also just shows how much a single person, a single face, a single personality can just drive these stories. And another great, well, not really great, but another thing social media is showing us how personalities are almost everything. Influencers are basically everything. It's how brands and companies and organizations are all trying to market themselves and push themselves forward. It doesn't matter if you're a sports betting company or a luxury footwear company or a swimwear brand or whatever it happens to be, you are just going to basically need to find some personalities to hawk your stuff. And China has been trying to do that basically with this girl, Eileen Gu. Let me show you what she looks like. Eileen, yep, I'll cover myself. Eileen is a very attractive, well, I think 18. I actually don't know if she's probably 18, 19, teenager, who is now competing for China. And this is really a major thing. If you're a Chinese propagandist, you couldn't ask for anything better than this. This is basically a youth prodigy in a sport who decided to compete for China instead of the United States, even though she was born in San Francisco and is basically grown up as an American. That is amazing. That says to China and to people in China, wow, China is clearly better if you are doing this to basically, if you're going to compete for China instead of the United States, that's just, it allows an easy narrative that China is better. It's extremely appealing, extremely appealing to China. And that's why you get stuff like this, right? I mean, this is really the story that China loves, right? This is Eileen Gu winning great medals and wrapping herself in the Chinese flag. I mean, this is just, it doesn't really get better than this if you're actually looking at, if you're a Chinese censor, right? You're trying to put out a massive narrative about how amazing China is right now in the world, how things are going great. You have to compete against really, really bad stories in your economic, basically in your economic system, in basically people's lives, and then obviously all the stuff around the world, the politics, the diplomacy, all these things that are just trending terribly for China. You need to put on this massive show of global harmony and political glory and achievement, all this stuff that China is really basically trying to repeat since 2008, those Olympics is trying to do it again. And you couldn't ask for something better than basically someone who says, wow, I really want to get China, I want to basically get China medals and have all my achievements be associated with China, not the United States. This is really great. Although, we'll be clear, you can't really push this too hard. Eileen is like 18. Eileen Goo is like 18, 19. And she could easily, after 4 years at Stanford, decide, maybe China is filled with human rights abuses and had all these problems and becomes basically something that China can't, you don't want to actually hang your hat on this, right? You don't know if this person's values might completely change. You don't really right know. So this is like, if you were a propagandist, this would be hashtag propaganda problems. You don't quite know what someone's going to do, especially a young, impressionable sort of young woman, where her ideas, values, beliefs, interests, where it'll take her. So you can't really rely on it too much. And also say, just in general, someone like Eileen Goo, you see this all around the United States. You see this basically anyone, particularly the United States, where you have Asian American, you have, and obviously that doesn't really mean anything for anyone who is Asian American. It means Chinese American, Japanese American, Vietnamese American, all these things. You're always, as Americans, when you've moved to this country, you're trying to integrate into this melting pot. You're always questioning and going through your heritage as part of your own search for identity, as part of your own personal exploration of ethnicity and what it means for you and how you relate into the United States. This is part of a long process for anyone, just individually growing up, and then for specifically for different groups, whether that's Chinese Americans. It's very different if you were Chinese American in the late 1800s versus 1960s versus today. And it just goes like that in a way that basically what I'm saying is Eileen Goo's decision to compete for China might be a lot more about Eileen Goo and her relationship to her mother and her mother's love for China. And I'm just extrapolating. I don't even know all that much, but this sort of thing is very common. And yeah, you don't want to hang your hat on that too much. It's just very dangerous. And in general, this is kind of a funny thing. China doesn't have these problems that the United States has, right? The United States was basically and is basically still an immigrant country. People came to this country, people still come to this country, and in that process of moving from one place to another, you have to basically figure out what you're keeping from where you left and what you're bringing to this new country, what you're going to absorb from your new country. And that is a natural problem. China doesn't have that because it has very strict foreign rules. You're not actually allowed to have basically two passports. You can't be dual citizen if you're of China. You have to be Chinese citizen or nothing else. This is kind of why, because you're kind of a Chinese subject in a lot of ways and not as much a citizen as we think about it in the West. But China's relaxed these rules for the Olympics, right? Because what Eileen Goo did, she didn't actually reject her American citizenship. She didn't say, all right, take my American passport, I'm now Chinese. No, that would be something very different. What China's done is it's relaxed its citizenship rules to allow a lot of foreign-born or foreign Chinese people to compete for China, right? And the big reason why is because it wants the medals, right? It wants a bunch of hockey players. It wants people like Eileen Goo. It wants as many people as possible to be able to compete for China because they love their heritage. They love their ethnic identity. They want to support their country. They support the general modernization, nationalization, and basically advancement of China in the world. And they may be trying to split that from any of its sort of obvious political, human rights problems, all that kind of stuff. That's fine. That China doesn't really allow that most of the time. But when you need medals, it's very happy to do that. So right now, Eileen Goo has decided to become Chinese, right? This is kind of the subtle play here. This isn't someone who's choosing to actually become Chinese, because this is actually where the rubber hits the road, right? If people really love China, they would become Chinese citizens. They would move to China. It's something very different. This is more of a symbolic, it's more subtle sort of association. And it's part of exploration. It's part of affirming your own identity and the complexity of your identity compared to absorbing like a stock identity like you get in the United States. So a good friend of mine recently he's Nigerian. He went to Nigeria. He believes African American, and that's part of his identity, but he also wanted to go explore more his specific national roots in Africa. It's a very similar thing for everybody, right? For me included in other ways. It's part of this process. The challenge, of course, with China, which I've said in another video, people should check it out, is people actually don't move to China. China has a huge immigration problem. the people who do move to China, basically as immigrants, are basically Chinese of Chinese descent, right? So this isn't a country that basically pulls in other people. And for a lot of elite athletes, it had to relax these rules about citizenship because it knew that these basically top tier athletic talents of the world weren't going to abandon what they had in the rest of the world just to do that sort of Chinese ethnic exploration part of their journey. So this is a big problem. And a big reason why people don't move to China is because you can't actually split all of these political problems, all of these things you don't like about China from the things you do like. You like its history and its achievements, its historical achievements, its language, the culture it's developed, the literature, the art, the poetry, whatever it happens to be. All of these things you may love, but you end up also having to deal with stuff like this. This is a story that basically sprung up in the last week or so, and it's really worth talking about. I am not just throwing this up to pull out something terrible about China. This is a photograph of a rural woman in Jiangsu province who was recently photographed basically chained to a wall in a doorless shed. And this is a story that blew up in China. Like I said, I'm not just pulling this out of nowhere. This thing, it blew up and it punched the government in the mouth, basically. They're trying to have an amazing Olympics. It's trying to be just a glorious affirmation of where China is and how amazing it is and how the world looks to it, how foreign Chinese people and other people around the world are coming to China to watch these Olympics and even to compete for China, like Eileen Goo. And then you have this, you have a mother of 8, I believe, who's basically chained to a wall in a doorless shed in a small rural village in eastern China. And this is terrible. And this got like 2 billion clicks basically on Chinese social media. It was huge. And the government's official statement on the case, because they couldn't ignore this, right? 2 billion people, there's limits to what you could control. Even if you're in China, this thing blew up. It blew up too fast, and now they had to respond. And the government's official statement, I think it was the provincial or local government in this area, its official statement on the case was huge. It got like 300 million views or clicks or whatever it was. And this was bigger. It was trending higher on Chinese social media than the Olympics itself. So this was internal to China. This isn't some foreigner like me coming in and saying, oh, here's what you need to really focus on because China's really bad. It's like, no, within China, this story spawned organically, right? And it really is organic because in China, you don't have basically foreign correspondents really there anymore. You don't have investigative journalists in China either at this point. It's all state media. It's extremely, extremely controlled. Really, the only outlet is social media. So that's what's going on. And this story just popped up, and everything about the story is suspect and horrific and pretty horrible and heinous. I'm not really going to go into it. There's multiple reports about who the woman is and where she came from and why she apparently has 8 children in a place where there was a one-child policy in place. A lot of bad stuff. And this story does tie in with all of China's problems, well-known problems around human rights and obviously human trafficking, organ trafficking, all sorts of stuff like that. So this is really what we see. This is this juxtaposition, to use an old word from like high school literary studies or something. This is this contrast between the great image that China wants to put up and then the image of what is still going on. This is the sign that China can't really control everything. It can't even control. It's doing the biggest propaganda blitz, God, we might have ever seen. It is doing it with more bots and more influencers, more paid things than you could even imagine. Eileen Goo is like plastered all across China right now. China's trying to control everything. And in China, you do need to control the narrative. If people should check out other videos I have, this is not something where China has an option to have a free society and to be a unified, centrally integrated country. It doesn't. It has to have propaganda. It has had propaganda since basically for at least 2,000 years. It's necessary. And China needs to control this story and this narrative, but it also can't. You can't control everything. You can really try. And China is trying. It's trying not just with propaganda and not just with narrative control. It's trying with every sector and every industry in the country and with all of its foreign relations. But there is just a limit to what you can do. Even when you're trying to put on a show for the whole world and you have your propagandists working like quintuple time to get it all done, to tamp down any bad story, to get just the right angle for every shot, to have basically everything look like this Potemkin village of glorious China on the rebound and on its way to basically a radiant, resplendent future in the sky where all the other nations of the world will be admiring it till the end of time. That, of course, isn't going to happen. And we just saw this when China's dark shadow was revealed. And in its own country, on its own social media, there's no Facebook, there is no Google, there's nothing there that inserted itself to create this story. You had naturally the creation of a story that just undermines the entire narrative China was trying to put up. So I'm probably going to leave this at that today. There's a lot to talk about with all this propaganda, but it is just too much. I think all the tactics and all of that kind of stuff is worth going over some other time, but really just seeing how no matter when you're doing maybe one of the best campaigns, propaganda campaigns anyone's ever seen, you still can't entirely get it done. And there's also a sign that China's problems are becoming much harder for not only for foreigners to accept with Xinjiang and Hong Kong and all the problems there that people are no longer, and politicians and people in other countries are no longer just willing to accept. You even have problems bubbling up in China that very soon China itself is going to really struggle to get a handle on. So thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. It's been a little while, but as always, if you like the video, definitely like it, share it, send it as far as you can so more people can see it. And yeah, subscribe to this channel. You get more videos like this, more of me wearing yellow shirts, purple shirts, green shirts, blue shirts, every kind of shirt, and talking about China and talking about where this world is going and how we can try to better navigate it as things get worse and